And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. The length of a person's career will depend on the field they work in. However, over the course of a person's lifetime, they'll work an average of 90,000 hours. Looking at this further, work accounts to roughly 13 years and 2 months for most people's lives now. Overtime can add an extra 2 months to your work year if you often put in extra hours. On today's Open Connection, we rejoin the conversation with Mary French as she shares why she chose to leave the RCMP.
I resigned from the RCMP, and part of that equation that helped me come to that decision was my mom called me, and my dad's health was failing, and my dad owned his own company and his own business. And she, sorry, I laugh because she phoned me, and I have 3 older brothers that live in my hometown. So I'm like, why are you calling me to tell me that I don't want to work at a flooring store. I got a gun. So I'm like, Mom, I don't understand. Like, why are you calling me to tell me that, Dad's health is failing and she's like, well, your brothers are idiots. And Dad's not going to let them take over the store. Thank God my brothers aren't here today. So that was part of the equation. And so we went back and I took over our family business. And I worked in that space until my dad was able to sell his company and retire. And that brought me back to my hometown. And when I left that role, that's when I got working with the school board. And working with Indigenous youth was anyone in this room. Is there anyone, actually, let me just pause for 1 second. Is there anyone in this room that works with Indigenous children or youth? Let's give them a hand. Please, the hardest work I've done in my life. It was so heart-wrenching. It was so hard because when you put on the uniform, and I'm sure Ryan can attest, when I put on the uniform, somehow think it gives you superpowers. And so when you don't have that uniform, you don't get to hide behind that badge. It's real. And you see these kids coming to school. So I was in high school the first year, and it was great. It was a really successful year. Second year, they moved me to middle school. And that's the age, I realized it from my own life, when I was little, that's the age you realize that look at somebody, that feeling of racism. And that it was hitting these kids square between the eyes. They were feeling it. They realized in middle school that kids were calling them dirty Indians, that people were talking about them, that teachers were talking to them differently. And I only did that job for a year. So for everyone in this room that's your career and that's I just want to recognize how incredible that is, because it is a tough lane to be in. So we moved back to Alberta. After my dad sells his company, and I can't work in that space. We moved back to Alberta because there's opportunity for my husband for work, and in my hometown, the economy was crashing. The 2 mines closed, the mill closed. There was no work for our boys, and I no longer had a family flooring store to employ them. So we moved back to Alberta, and life is going really good. And I've always prided myself in being grateful for what I have, not what I don't have. And so we practice a life of, what I thought of gratitude. And our son was killed. And I'm not alone in this room, because I know that people in this room have lost a grandchild, a child, a sibling way too soon. And that's not how the world is supposed to work. You should never outlive your children. And it brought me to a place of brokenness, a place where I truly believed I could never be whole again. I truly believed that the sun would never shine again, that I would never see the light, that I would never find joy again. That son had given us our only grandchild. It's the only one we have still. Nobody else wants to breed with my other children. So we got this beautiful, beautiful grandson, and then we lost his father a year later.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Death is difficult, a natural part of life. It can be hard to deal with the loss of a loved one when there's enough time to anticipate it. However, when a loved one passes away unexpectedly, managing the grief alongside the trauma can be overwhelming. Let us return the conversation as Mary shares how she grappled with the passing of her son.
He was a beautiful, spirited human being. And what we didn't realize was he was the funny kid in our family. He was at family dinners. He's the one that made us all laugh. He's the one that came back with the craziest stories that, and he actually, I'm going to share a clack story here. He became a pipe fitter, and he went up to Fort McMurray and was making way too much money for an 18-year-old. And he was up in Fort McMurray, and he comes back, and he has a clack baseball cap, he's got a clack hoodie, he's got a clack water bottle. And I was not familiar with unions at the time. And so he walks in, and clearly my kid is with clack. And I'm like, "What's clack, Dylan?" And he says, "It's my union." I'm like, "Yeah, but what's clack stand for?" And he's like, "I don't know." I'm like, "Well, let me research that." So I punch it into my phone, and I remember looking at my son, who had just spent most of his paycheck at the strip club in Fort McMurray. I remember looking at my phone and looking at my son and all this clack gear, and I'm like, "You're part of the Christian Labor Association of Canada?" And he's like, "No, I'm not." And I show him my phone. I'm like, "That's what clack is." And he's like, "Holy shit." And I just remember how funny he was, and how he and so, you know, we lose Dylan, and it is a brokenness, like I said, I had never thought that I would ever experience. And so I chose to get whole again. And this is the hard part, everyone. I did 2 years of extensive therapy. 2 years. And what I realized is my brokenness didn't happen when we lost Dylan. Oh, my brokenness was accumulation, childhood trauma, policing trauma. You know, it was all that stuff that we keep inside. It was that stuff that we're scared to let anybody in on. And I know that I'm not alone in that space. You know, I have friends now who are also maybe in leadership roles, and we talk about that. We make time for that, because when we feel like we have nothing left, because that happens when you're out and you're trying to make change, you feel like your cup gets empty. And so the one thing I want to talk about today is that you have to take care of yourself. And that doesn't make you proud. That makes you lead by example. And it lets you stay true to who you are, so that every day, every one of you in this room can continue to do the great work that you're doing. Because if you don't stay mentally well, then how can you keep doing what you're doing? And how can you help your family or your children? And so whatever that looks like, taking care of yourself in mental health is a different path for everybody. But I think recognizing that maybe your cup is empty, recognizing that you need to lean on friends, that maybe you need some downtime, and sometimes your body will just do it to you. Recently, I was traveling for work and found myself in an ambulance in the middle of the night in excruciating pain. My gallbladder wanted a divorce, and there was no time for divorce lawyers. So I ended up in a hospital in Vancouver Island and had to get my gallbladder out. And I was not near my home. It wasn't planned. I had meetings. I had important meetings. And my body said no. So sometimes maybe when our cup is getting empty, maybe when your body will tell you as well. And it's so important to make sure that you listen when those moments are coming to you. It's important to not be afraid or to tell people. You know, I remember in the beginning when I was going through therapy, not wanting to tell people because it meant that I wasn't this big, strong goth anymore. It meant that I wasn't invincible, or it made me think I was weak.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Mental health encompasses emotional, psychological, and social well-being, influencing cognition, perception, and behavior. According to the World Health Organization, it is a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her abilities, can cope with normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and contribute to his or her community. Let us return to the conversation as Mary shows why she chose mental health.
I chose my mental health. I chose to get whole again, and I fought for it. And it's not an easy thing to do, but I'm telling you, if you want to help make change, it's training, because you feel like you're educating these powerful white men all the time, right? Like we've heard that a few times today, and I never want to come across as being racist. I never want to come across as bitter, because back to gratitude. I'm so grateful where I've landed. I'm so grateful that, so I'm at home doing therapy, trying to get whole, pretty much living in my PJs till like 4 o'clock. My husband comes home at 4:30. I'd run upstairs and put on clothes because I could see after a year the disappointment in his eyes that I was still in my PJs and not showered. So we're getting up to 2 years, and we organized a memorial golf tournament in our son's memory. And doing that just before 2 years of the anniversary of losing him, it made me get busy again. And it made me organize the tournament and raise money for other Indigenous youth that wanted to get into trades. Because as we all know, when I went to university, the only way I could get funding for education was to get a degree. When I went through school, you couldn't do it for trades. You couldn't do it for a diploma. It had to be for a degree. And so I said to my husband, let's create a scholarship or a bursary in Dylan's name and organize this golf tournament. And it was really good because it made my brain start working again, and it made me. So I said to my husband after the golf tournament, I need to go back to work. It's time. And he said, well, what do you want to be? And I should back up, because when our son died, I was still working for the RCMP, but I was working as a civilian at that time. I left policing and went into being a 911 operator, which is ironic that she spoke about a 911 operator this morning. And that was a really hard change for me, because when you're a police officer, you're out and you're dealing with the problem. And when you're on the phone and somebody's screaming for help, you feel very helpless. And you just pray that somebody like Ryan's going to go to the call, because you have no control over that. You dispatch and you don't know what bounty is going to get sent. So I was dispatching when Dylan passed. And so I couldn't go back to that environment. I knew that. And so my husband was like, what do you want to be? What do you want to be when you grow up? And so I said to him, I want to be a fixer. And he kind of looked at me perplexed. And I said, I've realized that in all the careers I've had, that my bosses come to me when there's problems with relationships, when there's problems with, understanding why there's tension or why something's not working. And I wish I could get hired by a corporation to be their fixer. And he smiled and said, I've never seen a job posting that says fixer, babe. And he's like, I think you're going to go back and finish your degree. And because I quit my degree to get into the RCP. I got accepted and I left school. Not going to lie, going to university with 4 little boys was torturous and felt like almost impossible. And so my husband says you should go back to school. You want to work with your community or in that space, so maybe go back to school. And I couldn't find a program that I liked. I spent 2 days researching and looking at different programs, and nothing grabbed me. Like nothing made my heart get excited. And so 2 days later, my phone rings. And it's my old RCMP officer. And let me clarify, this man never called me a token. It was my peers. And he said, hey, Mayor, it's Randy Beck. He was actually posted here as an RCMP officer when he was young. He says, it's Randy Beck. I don't know if you know, but I'm the Chief Security Officer for Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I was like, I think I heard that. And he says, are you working right now? I said, no, actually, Randy, I'm not working. And he's like, oh, I'm shocked by that. That's great. Are you looking for a job? I said, actually, I am. And he said, I need a fixer.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
A probationary period occurs at the beginning of new hire's employment, during which the employer evaluates the individual's performance and suitability for the position. A probationary period allows the employer to trial new employees, monitor performance, and determine if they're a good fit for the company. In this final segment of Open Connection, Mary shares her probationary period with her employer.
And so he's talking, offers me this great salary that way beyond anything I had ever been paid as a government worker. And so he finishes and I said, okay, I'll give you a month. And I just remember the look on his face. He's like, you'll give me a month? I'm like, I'll give you a month. But if I feel like a token once, I'm out. I don't care what you pay me. I am done being a token. And I remember him saying, okay. Because he was so shocked. He wasn't prepared for it. And, I bet you if he had time to prepare for it, he probably would have told me that I wasn't the right candidate, because it was so odd to have somebody say, okay, I'll give you a month. You're on probation for a month as an employer. But that 2 years off and that 2 years of therapy made me realize part of the reason I was so drained was because I kept getting roles, or I kept getting jobs that drained me and didn't let me be true to who I was. And so you couldn't put a dollar amount on it. You couldn't buy me. And so the best part of this story is the president at that time of Trans Mountain Pipeline. And I'm not promoting the pipeline. I'm not here to promote the pipeline. Let me be clear. But the president at the time was maybe the greatest leader I'd ever worked for, that I've ever had privilege of working for. And I've said this before. Mr. Anderson, Ian Anderson, was our president at the time. And I have a dear friend here, Mary Ann, who worked with me on the project. And when you talk about surrounding yourself with great people, she flew here. She was in California yesterday, flew here this morning to come and support me. That's friendship right there. And I met Mary Ann under Ian Anderson's leadership, and she had a key role in employment and training. And so I get put on this team of security, and then they start lending me to Indigenous relations. And I start working in both spaces. And for the first time I worked for a person, a company, where the president valued me. He empowered me. He wanted to know what I was thinking. He wanted to know if we were being offensive. He wanted to know if we crossed the line. It was so odd to me that I could say, don't do that. I remember an example. A chief in one of the communities that I had become close to suddenly lost her mother. And I remember somebody in Indigenous Relations saying, we got to send her flowers. And I was like, we're not sending flowers. And they were like, what do you mean we're not sending flowers? And I'm like, I'm going to the grocery store and I'm bringing her food because that's what we do. You go ahead and send flowers, but you're going to get a receipt in my expense claims because I'm going to go and buy groceries because we feed each other. We take care of each other when we have loss in a community. You too. And this brings me back to, we don't always know, and we don't always get feedback, but what I didn't know at that time was that chief was such an incredible leader and led with her heart that anytime somebody in the community passed, she's the one that made sure that food and that the family was taken care of. And so she actually was feeling very disappointed in her community because nobody had brought food. And then I showed up. Like, I went to Costco and I loaded up. It was Trans Mountain's bill, so I showed up and she started to cry. And I didn't know that she was feeling disappointed in her community and that her heart hurt. I didn't know that. I just did and stayed true to who we are. Because white people love to think they have so much to teach us. But we have so much to teach. Because, thank you. And the most beautiful part of that story was while I was there, I think 6 other vehicles showed up with food. And it was a really beautiful moment for me, representing a company, knowing that the leadership wanted me to tell them when they got it wrong. And there is company partners here that I worked with on that project where maybe I was a little difficult. Maybe we were raising the bar, but my message is if you stay true to who you are, and you stay true to what you're doing, and you're not afraid to speak up. But what I used to do when I was younger is I would speak up and I'd be angry. And nobody wants to listen to somebody angry. But I choose to be grateful that I had 24 amazing years and he knew that I loved him. I know that. My grandson, I'm grateful of that beautiful gift of our grandson.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.